Hey guys, this is Maddix and I'm proud to present you my first ever plugin called Maddix Rumble. I often get the question how I get my kicks sounding so fat, so with Maddix Rumble I wanted to incorporate my workflow for big rumble kicks in one single plugin. It's perfect for any techno genre, but you can also use it creatively, so it's viable for multiple other genres. In this video, I'll explain you the basic features and show you some workflow examples, so let's get started. We have tried to keep the plugin as simple as possible, but with enough options to go in depth. Maddix Rumble is an effect plugin that consists of 5 separate modules to create the rumble that will layer on top of your original kick. The 5 modules consist of a delay, a reverb, a filter, a ducker, and a distortion. Combining these gives you endless possibilities to alter the sound of the generated rumble. There's a master section to control the width, dry, wet, or volume, and a limiter to prevent any possible clipping. On the left-hand side of the plugin, you can see your in and output volumes, as well as the sliders to control the respective volumes. Audio is routed from left to right, passing each module as we go, with an exception for the distortion module, which you can set either on the input, pre-filter, or post-filter. Up top, we have a nice oscilloscope showing you the input signal, the generated rumble, and the sidechain curve. You can enable or disable each module by clicking on its icon up top. If you want to hear just the generated rumble sound, enable the solo knob at the master section. Now, before we kick off, it's important to know that by default, the original kick sample is routed through the output of the FX chain without any FX applied. Now, let's take a look at the modules one by one. Some of them have unique possibilities, so be sure to watch this section. To kick off, let's disable all other modules so we can clearly hear what's going on. The delay module consists of 2 separate delays with on and off buttons. Enabling these lets you select sync delay values between 1/16th to 1/4. A dot stands for dotted, T for triplet, and combining these two can get you some interesting rhythms going on. Let's enable one of the delays and set its time to 1/16th to get a rolling bass effect. The damp control is basically a muffling effect to cut off higher frequencies for each repeated delay. This means that lower settings cut off high frequencies as time passes, which can be useful to get a more dynamic sounding rumble that changes in sound. Both feedback controls let you set the length of the delay. By default, they are linked, but can be unlinked as well for more precise tweaking. Short values give you only one delay tab, and longer values will keep it going for a while. Basic knowledge, right? One issue with long delays, and actually reverbs as well, is that they will start overlapping, making the sound less defined and get in the way of itself. We've tried to solve that. On the top right side of both the delay and the reverb module, you see a reset button. This button resets the full module whenever it starts again, completely solving this problem. The result is a more controlled rumble with possibilities to set long delay times and basically more freedom. The reset button is enabled by default but can always be turned off for other creative effects. The final knob in the delay section is a gain. This does exactly what it says, increase or decrease the volume of just the delay module. There is no dry-wet control here, as that is what's going on the master section. The gain knob is useful when either combining delay and reverb separately or to feed in louder towards the reverb, for example. Let's get onto the reverb module and enable it. The reverb module has some basic controls over the time, dampening, type, diffusion, size, and gain. Time speaks for itself and lets you go from super short to very long. While setting very long, make sure to check the reset button again so you won't overlap into the next reverb rumble. The damp knob has the same effect as the one in the delay module. It gets rid of higher frequencies as time passes. Reverb type is important and can give you different characteristics to the sound of the rumble. We have added 3 different types: hall, plate, and spring. Try these out and just play with them to get the preferred sound, as it can change quite a bit. The diffusion knob controls the density of the reflections. Low values result in low reflection density, allowing you to hear individual reflections more clearly. High values result in increased reflection density and a more uniform wash of reverb. The size, well, it controls the size of the reverb. Want a warehouse kick? Turn up the size. Low sizes can be fun sounding too, so be sure to try it out. Finally, we have a gain knob here as well to control the volume output of the reverb module. Now there's one more really important button in between these modules that I need to explain to you. This button gives you the ability to put both modules in either stereo or parallel. By default, it's set to parallel, which means that the dry input signal of the kick goes to both the delay and the reverb separately, combining it just before the filter, which is also the reason why the gain knobs are so useful. This way you can add both the delay and the reverb to your rumble and layer those together. Clicking it once switches this to serial mode, which means that the dry kick input signal only goes to the delay, from where only the wet delayed signal is sent to the reverb. This can be a pretty cool effect to wash out the delayed signal or to get a more groovy reverb signal. Try it out and be creative. Let's get on with the filter. This one is quite important, as usually we don't really want too many high frequencies in our rumble. When enabling it, both the delay and the reverb, regarding which mode they are in, will be sent to the filter. It has both a low cut and a high cut filter to precisely select your frequency range. The buttons below let you select the steepness of the filters, either 12 decibels per octave or 24 decibels per octave, wherein the 24 decibels per octave option is more steep. Next to that, we've added a resonance control to boost the cutoff frequencies at its cutoff point. This gives you the ability to highlight specific frequencies in your rumble and increase their volume. It is super useful, for example, to add a bit more low end in your rumble. The resonance controls are more intense when the 24 decibels per octave option is selected. They can also go quite crazy for more creative options. Next up is the ducker. The ducker is basically a sidechain compressor built in because you don't want your rumble and your kickstart interfering with each other. By default, the small fixed knob on the top right is turned on. This means that the ducker is triggered internally based on your project tempo on a 4 to the floor beat. So every beat it's ducked automatically. You can disable this feature if you are working with different kick patterns. Doing this will make the low cut viable. If the sync knob is disabled, the ducker will look at the input kick signal to trigger the compressor, and with the low cut knob you can cut out lower frequencies for the trigger so that the compression is only triggered by, for example, the punch or the click of the kick. The threshold lets you set the intensity of the sidechain compressor. This will give you final control on when to trigger, but it's not needed when you have the fixed knob turned on. The release knob sets the time it takes for the compressor to get back to no compression. Short values provide a short sidechain, and long values a longer one. Visual feedback on this is available in the oscilloscope up top, where the purple line represents the ducking values, so it's more easy for you to dial it in. The ratio knob sets the amount of compression. Higher values cut out the generated rumble almost completely, while lower values leave more of the sound intact. The mix knob is a simple blend between the dry signal and the sidechain signal and gives you easy control over the amount of sidechain without changing ratios. Now let's take a look at the distortion module. This module is placed at the bottom of the plugin because it's the only module that does not have a fixed place in the chain. With the route selector, you can set 3 different placements. Dry puts it before all modules, so you can distort the kick sample before it goes into the delay and the reverb. Pre-F stands for pre-filter and puts it in between the reverb and the filter. This means that the kick sample first goes through the delay and reverb modules, and then the distortion, then the filter. Final option is to put it post-F or post-filter. This is the most audible option as it distorts the rumble at the end of the chain. The type selector lets you select either a subtle or hard distortion mode, wherein hard gives you way more crunch. The drive speaks for itself. Drive the signal harder into the distortion and it gets more crunchy. With the gain and dry wet controls, you can fine-tune how much of the effect you actually want and how loud. The final section in the lower right corner is the master module. Here we can alter the width of the generated rumble easily. This is super useful as you don't always want your rumble to have width, especially in the lower frequencies. You can make it fully mono, fully wide, anything in between. The dry wet knob and the little lock icon next to it are super important. This is where you set the final mix volume of the rumble layer. The lock icon is there to lock the original input kick volume. It is enabled by default as most of the time you have your kick in your project already set to a specific volume that works in the track. The lock makes sure that the original volume is not altered and basically changes the dry wet knob to an overall volume knob for the rumble layer. Disabling the lock makes it a true dry wet knob, which is useful if you only want it to output the rumble layer, for example. Finally, we have a knob called limiter, which you can limit the sound so it doesn't clip. You could, however, also lower the volume on the right hand side with the slider. Up top, we have a preset manager, which includes around 60 presets made by me. These presets showcase some of the capabilities of the plugin, also in a more creative way. Be sure to check them out, but also just try and twist knobs yourself. Every kick sample is different, so some presets might work great on specific kicks and sound horrible on others. You can also save your own presets and organize them in folders by opening up the preset folder in your file manager. Before finishing the tutorial, I wanted to give you a quick tip on how I use this plugin in my workflow and in my projects. We've tried to add in as many features as possible, but at the same time, we try to keep the plugin as simple as possible as well. So I understand if some people want a bit more control of some of the features. We can do that quite easily. Let me show you how. Loading your kick sample, load the plugin on top and start working. When you have the desired sound, duplicate your whole track, including the plugin, and remove it from the original instance. Now go back to the copy track and press the solo button or turn the dry wet knob to full wet. You will now have the exact same sound, but the kick is splitted from the rumble. And some ideas what you could do right now are, you can disable the ducker, add in your own, disable the filter and add a full EQ, for example. Add in an imager to make the low end mono but keep the width of the highs. You can add different distortion types whatsoever. Because of the reset knobs that we added in the delay and reverb modules, there is no need to render it to audio, as every single generated rumble will sound the same. This is super easy to do and gives you complete freedom to alter the sound more. That's it for now. I hope you guys learned something new and will have lots of fun creating massive rumbles for your kick drums. The plugin Maddix Rumble is available now on the Revealed Recordings website. And yeah, have fun with it.